Officer Daniel Martinez opened his door at 11:47 p.m. and saw something impossible: his German Shepherd, Max, standing on his porch. The same dog that vanished 3 years ago the night of the fire. The dog everyone said was dead. But Max wasn't alone. Behind him stood a terrified little girl, 7 years old, covered in dirt and bruises. In her trembling hand she held a bracelet, pink beads melted by heat. The exact same bracelet Daniel had given his daughter Emma for her 4th birthday. The same bracelet they told him had burned beyond recovery when Emma died in the fire. The girl whispered, "Max says you're Emma's daddy." But Emma was dead. Daniel had seen the DNA results. He'd buried her himself 3 years ago, or had he? When Daniel looked closer at this mysterious girl, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Something that shouldn't be possible. Something that connected her to Emma in a way that defied everything he'd been told. But how could this be real? The authorities had confirmed Emma's death. His own mentor, the police captain, had personally closed the case. The medical examiner had certified it. Everything pointed to one truth: his daughter was gone. So who was this girl, and why did Max, a dog that had been missing for 3 years, bring her specifically to Daniel's door? Then Max did something even stranger. He started leading Daniel somewhere. Into the forest. Following a trail that seemed to have a purpose. A trail of blood and torn fabric that led deeper and deeper into the darkness. What they found there made Daniel realize this wasn't just about a lost girl. Someone had been hurt. Someone had been taken. And the broken phone they discovered had a photo that connected everything, but raised even more questions. That's when Daniel found something hidden in Max's collar. Something that would shatter every single thing he believed about his daughter's death. A letter. From someone who knew the truth. And what that letter revealed. It wasn't just about Emma. When Daniel confronted the people he trusted most, the people who were supposed to protect him, they didn't deny what he'd discovered. Instead, one of them pulled a weapon. Max took a bullet that night. But that gunshot exposed something far more terrifying than Daniel could have imagined. This wasn't about one child. This wasn't about one family. This was about something so big, so corrupt, so deeply hidden that it had been operating for years right under everyone's noses. Children who were supposed to be dead. Families who were told to move on. And a system that was hiding a secret so dark, even Daniel, a cop for 12 years, never saw it coming. The girl standing on his porch that night, she was just the beginning. Because what Daniel discovered next would lead him to 18 families, 18 children, and a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. People who swore to serve and protect were the same people who destroyed lives. Documents were falsified. Evidence was manufactured. And the children buried in those graves. They weren't who Daniel thought they were. Daniel had to fight not just to uncover the truth, but to prove something that seemed impossible to prove. And the only one who never gave up, who never stopped searching, who refused to let the truth stay buried, was a dog that everyone thought was dead. In a federal courtroom, with the world watching, the truth finally came out. But what was revealed that day left everyone speechless. Because the question wasn't just about what happened to Emma. The question was, how many other families are still mourning children who might still be alive? How many other cases were closed too quickly? How many other dogs are still searching? This is the story of a father who lost everything, a daughter who never stopped fighting to come home, and a German Shepherd who brought them both back from the dead. Stay with us because this story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Officer Daniel Martinez stood in his kitchen at 11:47 p.m., hands braced against the counter, staring at the half-empty whiskey glass he couldn't bring himself to drink. The house was too quiet. It had been too quiet for 3 years, ever since the fire that took everything from him. Then came the knock. Not aggressive, not timid, persistent. Daniel's hand instinctively moved to his holster before he remembered he wasn't on duty. He approached the door slowly, every instinct honed by 12 years on the force screaming that something was wrong. The porch light illuminated nothing but empty street. He was about to close the door when he heard it, a low, familiar whine that made his blood run cold. Daniel yanked the door open. His German shepherd, Max, the dog that had disappeared the night of the fire, the dog he'd searched for until the captain ordered him to stop. The dog he'd mourned alongside his daughter, stood on his porch, but Max wasn't alone. Behind him, half hidden in shadow, stood a little girl, maybe 7 years old. Dirt streaked across her cheeks, her clothes torn, ill-fitting, too thin for the October chill, and her eyes, God, those eyes, stared at him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope that punched straight through his chest. Max barked once, sharp, urgent, the way he used to when Daniel's daughter Emma would wander too close to the street. Daniel's throat tightened. Who are you?" The girl didn't answer. She just clutched something in her trembling fist, something small and metallic that caught the porch light as she extended her hand toward him. Max stepped between them, pressing his body against the girl's legs protectively. The dog's eyes locked onto Daniel's, and in that moment, Daniel understood. This wasn't a random encounter. Max had brought her here, on purpose. Daniel knelt slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe now." The girl's lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear. Daniel leaned closer. "Emma," she breathed. Max says, "You're Emma's daddy." The world tilted. Daniel's vision blurred. His daughter's name, spoken by a stranger who couldn't possibly know it, hung in the air like a ghost. Max whimpered, nudging the girl forward. She opened her fist. In her palm lay a small, partially melted bracelet. Pink beads fused together by heat, and engraved on the single intact charm, barely legible through soot and ash. Daniel's knees hit the porch. The bracelet he'd given his daughter for her 4th birthday. The bracelet the coroner said had been incinerated beyond recovery. The bracelet that shouldn't exist. Daniel couldn't breathe. His fingers trembled as he reached for the bracelet, half expecting it to vanish like every dream he'd had of Emma over the past 3 years. But it was real, solid. The metal still faintly warm from the girl's grip. "Where did you get this?" His voice came out harsher than intended, desperation bleeding through trained composure. The girl flinched. Max immediately stepped between them again, a low growl rumbling in his chest, not aggressive, but warning, "Careful." Daniel forced himself to soften. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I need to know, please." The girl's eyes darted to Max, as if seeking permission. The dog sat, tail thumping, once against the porch. She took a shaky breath. "The scary lady," she whispered. "She kept it in a box. With other things, from other kids?" Daniel's stomach turned to ice. "Other kids." The girl nodded, her small frame shaking. "She said we were all starting over. New names, new families. She said our old families didn't want us anymore." Her voice cracked. But Max remembered. Max remembered Emma. Daniel's mind raced, cop instincts colliding with the shattered father inside him. Adoption ring, identity theft. Children stolen through falsified death records. He'd heard rumors during his time in major crimes, whispers of kids disappearing from disaster sites, fires, floods, accidents where bodies were too damaged for proper identification, cases that went cold because the DNA evidence confirmed the victims. But Emma's DNA had been confirmed. He'd been there when they showed him the report. He'd held his captain's hand when they lowered the tiny casket into the ground. "What's your name?" Daniel asked gently, though his hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. The girl hesitated. "They call me Lucy. But I don't think that's my real name." Max barked, 3 times, deliberate, the way he used to when Emma was hiding during their games. The dog moved to the girl's side and pawed at her jacket. She reached into the pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, edges burned. Daniel unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a hospital bracelet, partially destroyed, but the printed letters were still legible. Patient Emma Rose Martinez, D.O.B. I was under 30/40/2019, Guardian Daniel Martinez. The paper slipped from his fingers. The girl in front of him, the one they called Lucy, had his daughter's birthday, his daughter's hospital ID, his daughter's dog. And when he looked closer, past the dirt and the fear and the 3 years of hell that separated them, he saw Emma's eyes staring back at him. Daniel's breath came in short, ragged bursts. The world around him, the porch, the street, the cold October night, faded into static. All that existed was the little girl in front of him and the impossible truth clawing its way out of the grave he'd dug 3 years ago. "Turn around," he whispered, voice breaking. The girl Emma, God, was it really Emma, looked at Max uncertainly. The dog nudged her gently, encouragingly. Slowly she turned. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached toward her left shoulder blade, the place where Emma had a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. He'd kissed it 1,000 times, called it her moon spot, told her it meant she was magic. His fingers brushed the fabric of her torn jacket. He hesitated. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm losing my mind? But Max's steady gaze held him. The dog knew. Somehow Max had always known. Daniel gently lifted the edge of the jacket. There, faint, small, but unmistakable, a crescent-shaped birthmark on her left shoulder. A sound tore from Daniel's throat, something between a sob and a gasp. He collapsed forward, arms wrapping around the girl as 3 years of grief, rage, and suffocating guilt shattered inside him. "Emma," he choked out. "Oh God, Emma, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The girl stiffened at first, unfamiliar with the embrace, with the name, with the man whose tears were soaking into her hair. But then, slowly, hesitantly, her small arms lifted and wrapped around his neck. And she cried. Not the silent tears of survival, but the deep, broken sobs of a child who'd been holding on too long. Max pressed against them both, completing the circle. For a moment, the three of them simply existed in the wreckage of what had been stolen. Then Daniel pulled back, hands cupping her face, memorizing every feature he'd thought he'd lost forever. "You're alive," he breathed. "You're alive, and I'm never letting you go again." But even as he said it, the cop in him was already screaming questions. How did she survive? How did they fake the DNA? Who buried a child in Emma's place? Emma, because that's who she was, no matter what name they'd tried to give her, looked up at him with exhausted eyes. "Max found me," she whispered. 3 days ago, I was in a bad house, with the scary lady, and Max broke the window and took me." Daniel's gaze snapped to the dog. Max's left ear was torn, fresh blood matting the fur. His right paw had a gash across the pad. The dog had fought through hell to bring her home. And suddenly, Daniel knew exactly what he had to do. He scooped Emma into his arms, grabbed his phone with his free hand, and carried her inside. Max followed, limping but resolute. As he dialed Captain Morris's emergency line, one thought burned through the chaos: someone was going to pay for this. Everyone involved was going to burn. While waiting for Captain Morris and the emergency response team, Daniel sat Emma on the couch, wrapped her in his old police academy blanket, and placed a glass of warm milk in her trembling hands. Max lay at her feet, refusing to leave her side. Daniel's hands wouldn't stop shaking as he reached for Max's collar. The leather was worn, scratched, stained with blood and dirt. But as his fingers traced the edges, he felt something unusual, a bulge beneath the inner lining. He carefully unbuckled the collar. Max watched him with knowing eyes. Daniel's pocket knife sliced through the stitching. A small, waterproof pouch fell into his palm. Inside was a folded letter and a USB drive. The letter was handwritten, ink smudged but legible. "Officer Martinez, if you're reading this, it means Max succeeded. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I've done, but I can't keep silent anymore. Your daughter never died in that fire. The body in her place was a Jane Doe from county morgue, overdose victim unclaimed, approximate age match. Dr. Richard Brennan falsified the dental records and DNA report. Your captain knew. Your mentor knew. They're part of a network that's been operating for 8 years, taking children from disaster sites, creating new identities, selling them to couples who'll pay 6 figures for a clean adoption. No paper trail, no questions. Emma was supposed to go to a family in Colorado, but she kept crying for you. She wouldn't stop. So they moved her 3 times, hoping she'd forget. She never forgot. I couldn't watch anymore. I left the bracelet and hospital band where Max could find them. He's smarter than any of us gave him credit for. The USB has everything: financial records, client lists, falsified documents. 18 children over 8 years. I know this won't fix what I helped destroy, but maybe it can save the others. A coward who should have spoken sooner. The letter wasn't signed. Daniel's vision blurred. His captain, Captain Morris, the man who'd held him when he broke down at Emma's funeral, who'd pushed him to go to therapy, who'd told him, "You have to let her go, son," had known, had orchestrated it. The front door burst open. Captain Morris strode in, 2 uniformed officers behind him, concern etched across his weathered face. "Daniel? Thank God, I got your call. You said you found a girl. We'll get social services." He stopped, His eyes landed on Emma, then on Max, then on the letter in Daniel's hand, and his expression shifted. Not to shock, not to confusion, to cold, calculated assessment. "Daniel," Morris said slowly, hand drifting toward his sidearm. "Let's talk about this. You're not thinking clearly. The grief, it's making you see things that aren't. Don't." Daniel's voice was steel. He stepped in front of Emma, Max growling low beside him. "Don't you dare." Morris's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. I know you sold my daughter." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. One of the officers behind Morris shifted uncomfortably. The other reached for his radio. Morris raised a hand, stopping them. "Stand down." His eyes never left Daniel. "This is bigger than you, Martinez, bigger than one child. The people involved, you can't touch them." Daniel's hand moved to his own weapon. "Watch me." Max's growl deepened, muscles coiling. And in that moment, Daniel realized he wasn't just fighting for Emma anymore. He was fighting for 18 stolen childhoods. And he wasn't backing down. Daniel didn't pull his weapon. Not yet. His eyes stayed locked on Morris, the man who'd been his mentor for 7 years, who'd taught him how to read a crime scene, who'd stood as best man at his wedding. "The USB," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of betrayal. "I've already uploaded it to 3 separate servers, cloud storage encrypted. If anything happens to me, to Emma, to Max, it goes to the FBI, the DOJ, and every major news outlet in the state." It was a bluff. He hadn't had time. But Morris didn't know that. The captain's face paled. "You don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly." Daniel's hand hovered near his holster. 18 children, 8 years. You used your position to identify vulnerable targets, fires, car accidents, floods, situations where bodies were too damaged for immediate identification. You worked with Dr. Brennan at the medical examiner's office to falsify dental records and DNA results. And then you sold those children to the highest bidder. One of the officers behind Morris, a younger cop named Stevens, looked like he might vomit. "Captain, is this true?" Morris didn't answer. His silence was confirmation enough. Emma whimpered behind Daniel, and Max's growl turned into a full snarl. The dog's loyalty was absolute. If Morris moved wrong, Max would tear through him without hesitation. Daniel took a step forward, placing himself fully between his daughter and the man who'd stolen her. "How much?" His voice cracked. "How much was my little girl worth to you?" Morris's jaw clenched. For a moment something flickered in his eyes. Was it guilt? Regret? But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by cold pragmatism. 240,000, Morris said flatly. "A couple in Boulder, couldn't have kids, they were desperate. She would have had a good life, Daniel. Private schools, stability, everything you couldn't give her on a cop's salary." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. "You son of a, I did you a favor," Morris continued, his voice rising. "You were a mess after your wife left. Drinking on the job, showing up late. Emma deserved better." "She deserved her father," Daniel roared, the composure he'd clung to finally shattering. "She deserved to not be ripped away from the one person who loved her more than his own life." Stevens stepped back, hand on his radio. "Captain, I'm calling this in." Morris spun, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion.
"No."
"You're not." The room froze. Daniel's hand closed around his own gun, but he didn't draw. Not with Emma 6 feet behind him. Not with a loaded weapon pointed at a fellow officer. "It's over, Morris," Daniel said, forcing his voice steady. "Even if you shoot me, Stevens knows. The letter's been read. The evidence exists. You can't kill all of us." Morris's hand trembled, just slightly. "The registry already lists her as deceased. Her death certificate is filed. There's no legal pathway for you to reclaim her. Even with DNA, you'd have to prove the original results were falsified, which means accusing the ME's office, the state lab, and half the Department of Conspiracy. Do you know how insane that sounds?" "I don't care how it sounds," Daniel whispered. "She's my daughter. She's a ghost," Morris snapped. "Legally, she doesn't exist anymore. And the people I work for, they don't leave loose ends." Behind Daniel, Emma started to cry, not loud, not dramatic, but the quiet, broken sobs of a child who'd learned that screaming didn't bring help. Max shifted, positioning himself directly in front of her. And Daniel realized with sickening clarity that Morris wasn't here to cover this up quietly. He was here to finish what the fire had failed to do. "Emma," Daniel said softly, not taking his eyes off Morris, "I need you to crawl behind the couch. Right now, Max." Go with her, Morris warned. Oh, Daniel barked. Emma scrambled behind the furniture, Max hurting her with his body. The moment they were out of the line of fire, Daniel drew his weapon. 2 guns, 2 cops, and only one of them was willing to die for the truth. Last chance, Daniel said, his voice deadly calm. Put it down. Walk away. Let me fix this. Morris's finger moved to the trigger. I can't do that. Then I guess we both know how this ends. For 3 agonizing seconds, neither man moved. Then Morris's radio crackled to Lal units. This is dispatch. We have a 1033 at 4738 Maple Street, Captain Morris's location. FBI en route. Repeat. FBI en route. Morris's face drained of color. Stevens, still holding his radio, stared at his captain with disgust. I already called it in. Before we even got here. Daniel's chest flooded with relief so intense he nearly dropped his weapon. Morris's gun lowered an inch, then another. You've destroyed everything, he whispered. No, Daniel said quietly. I'm saving what you tried to kill. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Morris looked at the door, at his weapon, at Daniel. And then, with the resignation of a man who knew the walls were closing in, he set his gun on the floor and raised his hands. It's bigger than me, Morris said hollowly. You have no idea what you've started. Daniel kicked the gun away and kept his weapon trained on the man he'd once called a friend. Then I'll finish it. By the time the FBI crashed through the door, Emma was in Daniel's arms, Max was at their feet, and the first domino of an 8-year conspiracy had finally fallen. But Daniel knew this was only the beginning. 6 weeks later, the rain came down in sheets. Daniel stood on the old mill bridge, collar turned up against the storm. Phone pressed to his ear as his attorney rattled off the latest developments. The federal case had exploded into a multi-state investigation. 19 children recovered so far, 12 perpetrators arrested, including Dr. Brennan and 2 family court judges. But the architect of it all, the person Morris refused to name, even with a plea deal on the table, remained a ghost. Until tonight. Daniel ended the call and stared at the river churning below. The same river he'd stood over 3 years ago, bottle of pills in his pocket, convinced that joining Emma was the only way to stop the pain. Max had found him that night too, barking, pulling at his jacket, refusing to let him step off the edge. You've always known, haven't you, boy? Daniel murmured. The dog sat beside him, ears flattened against the rain, eyes alert. Headlights cut through the storm. A black sedan pulled onto the bridge, stopping 20 feet away. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out mid-50s, expensive coat, graying hair pulled into a tight bun. Daniel's blood ran cold. Judge Catherine Aldridge, family court. 30 years on the bench. A pillar of the community. And according to the encrypted files on Morris's USB, the person who'd orchestrated the entire operation, Officer Martinez, she called over the rain, her voice steady despite the storm. I wondered when you'd figure it out. Daniel's hand moved to his concealed weapon. You signed the death certificate. You closed Emma's case. You made sure no one looked deeper. Aldridge walked closer, unbothered by the rain. I saved her. That house you were raising her in, mold in the walls, heat barely working, a father drowning in grief and whiskey. She deserved better. You had no right? I had every right. Aldridge snapped, her composure cracking. I've spent 30 years watching the system fail children. Good parents denied because of paperwork. Abusive parents granted custody because they could afford better lawyers. I got tired of watching kids suffer because of bureaucracy. Daniel took a step forward. So you decided to play God. I decided to play Savior, she corrected. Every child we placed went to vetted families. Families with resources, stability, love to give. We didn't sell them to monsters, Daniel. We gave them futures. You stole their identities. You faked their deaths. You made their real families believe they were gone. Daniel's voice broke. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it does to the other parents still out there grieving children who are alive? Aldridge's hand moved to her purse. I know you uploaded those files. I know the FBI has them. But here's what you don't know, half the names on those donor lists are people you'd recognize. State senators, police commissioners, a federal judge. This goes so far up that even if you testify, even if you expose everything, they'll bury you. Let them try. I'm giving you a choice, Aldridge said coldly. She pulled something from her purse, not a weapon, but a check. $5 million. Offshore account. You take Emma, you disappear, you keep your mouth shut at trial. Or, her other hand emerged, this time holding a small pistol. I make sure the truth dies here. With you, Max's growl rumbled low, vicious. Daniel's hand closed around his weapon. You're not walking off this bridge. Neither are you. The gunshot cracked through the rain. But Daniel didn't fire. Aldridge did, and Max, loyal, fearless, impossible Max, leaped. The bullet meant for Daniel's chest hit the German Shepherd mid-air. Max yelped, a sound that tore through Daniel's soul, and crashed onto the wet pavement. No, Daniel's weapon came up, but Aldridge was already stumbling backward, horror flooding her face. I wasn't aiming for. You shot my dog! Daniel's roar echoed over the river. Max whimpered, trying to stand, blood pooling beneath him. His eyes found Daniel's, and even through the pain, the dog's gaze held only one message: protect her. Finish this. Daniel dropped to his knees beside Max, hands pressing against the wound, feeling the warm blood pulse between his fingers. No, stay with me, boy. Stay with me. Aldridge backed toward her car, gun still raised. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights flickered through the rain. Stevens had been tailing them. The backup Daniel had secretly arranged. Aldridge looked at the approaching cruisers, then at Daniel, then at the river below. They'll destroy you, she whispered. Even if you win, they'll make sure you lose everything. I already lost everything, Daniel said, his voice hollow as he cradled Max's head. 3 years ago. Because of you. The patrol cars screeched onto the bridge. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. Drop the weapon! Hands up! Aldridge's gun clattered to the ground. She sank to her knees, hands raised, mascara running in black rivers down her face. I was helping them, she sobbed. I was helping. Daniel didn't watch them cuff her. He didn't hear Stevens calling for an ambulance. All he heard was Max's labored breathing, growing shallower with each passing second. You saved me, Daniel whispered, pressing his forehead to Max's. Twice. You saved me twice, and I can't lose you too. Max's tail thumped once against the pavement, and then his eyes closed. The emergency veterinary hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. Daniel sat in the waiting room, elbows on his knees, head in his hands, still covered in Max's blood. Stevens had driven him here while the other officers transported Aldridge to county lockup. The FBI had swarmed the bridge within minutes, seizing Aldridge's phone, her purse, her vehicle, everything that might contain evidence. But Daniel didn't care about evidence right now. He cared about the German Shepherd who'd been fighting for his family longer than any of them realized. Monsieur Martinez. A surgical tech emerged from the double doors, mask pulled down, exhaustion etched into her young face. Daniel shot to his feet. Is he? He's in surgery. Dr. Okonkwo is working on him now. The bullet punctured his lung and nicked an artery. It's very serious. Daniel's legs nearly gave out. But he's alive. For now. She hesitated. He's lost a lot of blood. We're doing everything we can, but his body's been through extreme stress. Even if we stabilize him, his recovery will be, I don't care. Daniel's voice was fierce. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs. You save him. The tech nodded and disappeared back through the doors. Daniel sank into the chair, and for the first time in 6 weeks, since the night Emma came back into his life, he let himself break. The sobs came hard and raw, tearing out of his chest in waves he couldn't control. A small hand touched his shoulder. Emma stood beside him in her donated pajamas, courtesy of Child Services, who'd placed her in temporary foster care while the legal nightmare sorted itself out. Stevens had pulled strings to let Daniel have supervised visits, and tonight, the supervisor had allowed her to come to the hospital. Daddy. Her voice was so small, she'd only just started calling him that again. Is Max going to die? Daniel pulled her onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her like he could shield her from every terrible thing in the world. I don't know, but he's strong. He's the strongest dog I've ever known. He saved you, Emma whispered. Like he saved me. Yeah, Daniel's voice cracked. He did. They sat like that for 2 hours, Daniel watching the clock. Emma eventually falling asleep against his chest, Stevens bringing terrible coffee and sitting in silent solidarity. Finally, the doors opened again. Dr. Okonkwo, a tall woman with steady hands and kind eyes, walked out, surgical cap still on, a cautious smile on her face. He's stable. Daniel's breath left him in a rush. Thank God. The surgery went better than expected. We repaired the lung, cauterized the artery, and gave him 2 units of blood. He's incredibly resilient. Honestly, most dogs wouldn't have survived the initial trauma. But he's not out of the woods yet. The next 48 hours are critical. Can I see him? Darkonquo nodded. He's sedated, but yes. Follow me. Daniel carried Emma through the halls, Stevens trailing behind. They entered a recovery room where Max lay on a heated pad, chest wrapped in bandages, IV in his leg, oxygen tube at his nose. But his chest was rising and falling. He was breathing. Emma wiggled out of Daniel's arms and approached the table carefully. She placed her tiny hand on Max's paw, the same way he'd placed his paw on her hand the night he brought her home. "Thank you," she whispered to the sleeping dog. "Thank you for being brave." Max's ear twitched. His paw flexed slightly beneath her touch, and Emma smiled for the first time since she'd been found. Stevens cleared his throat awkwardly. "Daniel, there's something else." He held out a manila envelope. Results came back from the independent lab, the one the FBI used. Daniel's stomach tightened. After Morris's arrest, the FBI had insisted on running new DNA tests, using samples directly from Daniel and Emma, processed by a lab with zero connection to the local police department or medical examiner's office. He'd been so focused on Max, he'd almost forgotten. With trembling hands, Daniel opened the envelope and pulled out the report. His eyes scanned the technical jargon, the probability percentages, the genetic markers, and there in bold print at the bottom, probability of paternity 99.997%, conclusion. Daniel Martinez cannot be excluded as the biological father of the tested child. Clear biological confirmation. The paper slipped from Daniel's fingers. Emma looked up at him, confused. "What does it say?" Daniel dropped to his knees in front of her, hands cupping her face, tears streaming freely. "It says you're mine," he choked out. "It says you're my daughter. Officially. Scientifically, no one can ever say otherwise again." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Really? Really?" She threw her arms around his neck, and Daniel held her like he should have been holding her for the past 3 years, tightly, fiercely, like nothing in the world could ever pry her away again. Stevens looked away, wiping at his own eyes. Dr. Okonkwo smiled softly. "I'll give you a few minutes." After a long moment, Daniel pulled back and looked at his daughter, not a ghost, not a stolen child, but the little girl who'd been his whole world and now was again. "Emma Rose Martinez," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Welcome home." Emma smiled through her tears. "I never left, Daddy." "Not really." Max's tail thumped weakly against the table. And somehow, despite everything broken, everything stolen, everything that had been shattered and burned, they were a family again. Daniel glanced at Stevens, who was pretending very hard not to be crying. "What happens now? With the case? With custody?" Stevens shook his head. "That's above my pay grade. But between you and me, with Aldridge in custody, Morris cooperating, and the FBI tearing through this thing like a wildfire, I don't think there's a judge in the state who'd rule against you." Daniel exhaled slowly. "And the other kids? 17 recovered so far. FBI's working on the rest. Your USB had addresses, transaction records, everything." Stevens managed a grim smile. "You didn't just save Emma, Daniel. You saved all of them." Daniel looked at his daughter, then at the dog who'd refused to give up, then at the DNA report that had finally ended 3 years of lies. "No," he said quietly, "Max saved us. I just listened." Max's chest rose and fell, steady and strong. And for the first time in 3 years, Daniel let himself believe that everything might actually be okay. 3 months later, Daniel stood outside the federal courthouse, straightening his tie for the 4th time. The marble steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and protesters, some holding signs that read "Justice for Stolen Children," others shouting accusations of conspiracy theories and government overreach. Emma sat beside him on the bench, legs swinging, clutching the stuffed German Shepherd toy Stevens had bought her. She'd insisted on coming today, even though the lawyers warned it might be difficult. "You don't have to do this," Daniel reminded her gently. "I can testify without you." Emma shook her head firmly. "I want people to know. I want them to know what happened." Max, recovered now, though with a permanent limp, sat at her feet, ever vigilant. The dog had been awarded a commendation from the mayor and honorary K9 status from the department. He wore his new badge on his collar like a medal of honor. Stevens jogged up the steps, slightly out of breath. "They're ready for you." Full courtroom. Every major outlet is covering this live. Daniel's stomach churned. He'd testified hundreds of times as a cop, but never like this. Never as the victim. Never with his daughter's entire future hanging on whether a jury believed that the system had betrayed them. The courtroom was suffocating. Daniel took the stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp woman named Delgado who'd built her career on corruption cases, approached with a tablet in hand. "Officer Martinez, can you explain to the jury what happened on the night of March 3rd, 3 years ago?" Daniel's throat tightened. "There was a fire. At my home, I was on shift when I got the call. By the time I arrived, the structure was fully engulfed. Firefighters pulled a body from my daughter's room." He paused, forcing himself to continue. "I was told she died from smoke inhalation. They said her remains were too badly burned for visual identification, but that dental records and DNA confirmed it was Emma. And you believed them." "I had no reason not to. Captain Morris was my mentor. Dr. Brennan was the chief medical examiner. These were people I trusted." Delgado pulled up a document on the screen behind the witness stand. "This is the DNA report filed in your daughter's case. Can you identify it?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "Yes, that's the report they showed me." "And what did you later discover about this report?" "That it was fabricated. The DNA sample tested didn't belong to the body found in my home. It belonged to a Jane Doe from the county morgue, a teenage overdose victim with no living relatives." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Delgado let that sink in before continuing. "How did they accomplish this substitution?" Dr. Brennan had access to the morgue and the state DNA database. He switched the samples before processing and falsified the chain of custody documentation. Captain Morris, as the supervising officer, ensured no one questioned the results. Delgado pulled up another image, a grainy photo of a young girl, maybe 15, lying on a morgue slab. The jury shifted uncomfortably. "This is Jane Doe 2019-47, recovered from an abandoned motel on January 14th. Cause of death fentanyl overdose, no identification. No family ever came forward." Delgado's voice hardened. "This is the girl who was buried in your daughter's place. This is the child whose death was used to fake Emma's." A juror in the front row covered her mouth. Daniel forced himself to look at the photo. Somewhere, this girl had a family too, people who might still be searching, who might never know what happened to her. "They didn't just steal Emma," Daniel said, voice raw. "They stole this girl's identity too. They made her disappear twice." Delgado nodded solemnly. "The defense has argued that this was an honest mistake, a clerical error compounded by tragedy. Do you believe that?" "Nope." Daniel's answer was immediate. "The financial records show Captain Morris received $240,000 3 days after Emma's funeral. Dr. Brennan received $80,000. Judge Aldridge facilitated 9 similar transactions over 4 years. This wasn't a mistake. It was a business." The next witness was Emma herself. Daniel's heart nearly stopped as the bailiff helped her into the witness stand, adjusting the microphone down to her level. She looked impossibly small in the oversized chair, but her eyes, God, her eyes, held a strength that no 7-year-old should have to possess. The defense attorney, a slick man named Paulson, approached with a condescending smile. "Hello, sweetheart. Do you know why you're here today?" "Yes," Emma said clearly. "To tell the truth. And do you know what the truth is?" "That I'm Emma Rose Martinez. That I didn't die in a fire. That bad people took me and tried to make me into someone else." Paulson's smile tightened. "But you were very young when this allegedly happened. Are you sure you remember correctly? Children often mix up dreams and reality." "I remember everything." Emma's voice didn't waver. "I remember the fire. I remember the scary lady telling me my daddy didn't want me anymore. I remember crying every night for a year. I remember Max finding me and breaking the window to take me home." Paulson tried again. "But your current memories could be influenced by what you've been told since then." "I remember my daddy reading me Goodnight Moon every night." Emma interrupted, tears welling in her eyes but her voice steady. "I remember his badge number 2847. I remember our secret knock 3 fast, 2 slow. I remember everything because I never stopped being his daughter, no matter what names they called me." The courtroom was dead silent. Paulson had no response. After 3 days of testimony, from FBI agents, forensic accountants, the anonymous whistleblower, and 8 other recovered children, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. Daniel stood as they filed back in, Emma's hand clutched in his, Max pressed against his leg. On the charge of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of falsifying government documents, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of child trafficking, we find the defendants guilty. With each verdict, Daniel felt another chain break, another piece of the nightmare crumble. When it was over, Delgado approached him in the hallway, exhaustion and triumph warring on her face. The judge is expediting Emma's legal restoration. New birth certificate, sealed records, within 2 weeks, legally. It'll be like she was never gone. Daniel's eyes burned. She was never gone. Not to me. Delgado smiled. I know, but now the world knows it too. Outside, Daniel lifted Emma into his arms and carried her down the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but he didn't stop. Max limped beside them, tail wagging. And as they reached the bottom step, Emma whispered into Daniel's ear, "Can we go home now, Daddy?" Daniel kissed her forehead. "Yeah, baby, we can go home." 6 months after the trial, Daniel hadn't been back to the property since the fire. The city had condemned it, and he'd avoided it like a wound too painful to touch. But Emma had asked, softly, hesitantly, if they could go together. "I need to see it," she'd said. "I need to see that it's really gone." So on a crisp autumn morning, Daniel drove them to the end of Maple Street, where the charred skeleton of their old house still stood, swallowed by weeds and time. Max hopped out of the truck first, sniffing the air cautiously. Emma slid her hand into Daniel's as they approached the sagging fence. The structure was barely recognizable. Blackened beams jutted toward the sky like broken ribs. The roof had collapsed entirely. The front porch, where Emma used to draw with chalk, where Daniel used to sit with his morning coffee, was nothing but ash and rot. "It's smaller than I remember," Emma whispered. Daniel swallowed hard. "Yeah, it is." They stood in silence for a long moment, the wind rustling through the dead grass. Max whined softly, pawing at the ground near what used to be the front door. "What is it, boy?" Daniel knelt beside him. Max dug frantically, unearthing something buried beneath the debris, a small, rectangular piece of metal, scorched but intact. Daniel brushed the soot away, and his breath caught. It was the nameplate from Emma's bedroom door. The one he'd custom-made when she turned 3, painted with tiny butterflies and her name in purple letters. Most of it had melted in the heat, the butterflies now unrecognizable blobs, but her name, Emma, was still visible, etched into the brass beneath the paint. Daniel held it in his trembling hands, and suddenly he was back in that moment, standing in the hardware store, debating between purple and pink, choosing purple because Emma had insisted butterflies liked purple flowers best. "You kept this?" Daniel whispered to the ruins. "All this time you kept this?" Emma leaned against him, tracing the letters with her finger. "Can we take it with us?" "Yeah, sweetheart, we can take it." Max barked once, then trotted toward the back of the property. Emma followed, and Daniel, still clutching the nameplate, trailed behind. Behind the house, where the small backyard used to be, Emma stopped. The old oak tree, the one with the tire swing Daniel had hung, was still standing. Charred on one side, but alive. New leaves had sprouted from the branches, defiant and green. Emma walked up to it, placing her small hand on the rough bark. "Daddy, remember when you pushed me so high I thought I could touch the clouds?" Daniel's throat tightened. "I remember. You laughed so hard you got hiccups." Emma smiled, but tears slipped down her cheeks. "I thought about that swing every day. Even when they told me you weren't my daddy anymore. Even when they called me Lucy. I thought about this tree and knew I'd come back someday." She turned to face him, and Daniel saw it, the little girl he'd lost and the brave survivor she'd become, standing in the space between who she was and who she'd been forced to be. "I never really left," Emma whispered. "Did I?" Daniel dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms. "No, baby, you never left. Not from here." He placed a hand over her heart. "Not from here." He placed a hand over his own. "And not from here." He gestured to Max, who sat watching them with wise, knowing eyes. Emma buried her face in his shoulder, and they cried together, not the desperate, broken sobs of grief, but the cleansing, healing tears of people who'd found their way home. Max padded over and pressed against them both, completing the circle. After a long while, Emma pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Can we plant something?" "Here by the tree." "Like what?" "Flowers." purple ones, so butterflies will come. Daniel smiled through his tears. Yeah, we can do that. They spent the next hour at the garden center, Emma carefully selecting seed packets, lavender, violets, coneflowers, while Daniel loaded a bag of soil into the cart. Max trotted beside them, tail wagging, enjoying the simple normalcy of the moment. Back at the property, they worked together in the shadow of the burned house, turning the soil, planting seeds, marking the spot with a small stone Emma painted with the words "Our family grew here." As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the ruins, Emma stood back and admired their work. "Do you think they'll grow?" she asked. Daniel squeezed her shoulder. "I think if they're half as strong as you, they'll grow just fine." Emma leaned into him and Max sat at their feet, and together they watched the sun sink below the horizon. The house was gone. The life they'd had before was gone. But standing there, covered in dirt, hands intertwined, Daniel realized something he hadn't understood until now: home wasn't the building. It wasn't the address or the nameplate or the tire swing. Home was wherever they were together. And they were finally, truly home. The house sat on a quiet hill overlooking the city, small but sturdy, with a wraparound porch and a backyard big enough for a garden. Daniel had used the settlement money from the lawsuit for $7 million from the city, the police department, and the medical examiner's office to buy it outright. No mortgage, no debt. Just a fresh start. Moving day was chaos. Stevens and a handful of officers from Daniel's old precinct showed up with a truck, pizza, and way too much enthusiasm. Emma directed traffic from the porch, clipboard in hand, telling grown men twice her size where to put boxes. Max supervised from his favorite spot, a sunny patch of grass where he could see everything, his K9 commendation medal hanging proudly from his collar. "Your daughter's bossier than any sergeant I've ever met," Stevens joked, hauling a box labeled Emma's book up the front steps. Daniel grinned. "She gets it from her mother." The mention of his ex-wife didn't sting anymore. She'd reached out after the trial, full of apologies and excuses, wanting to reconnect with Emma. Daniel had let Emma decide. Emma had politely declined. Some bridges, once burned, stayed burned. By evening, the house was functional, furniture in place, kitchen stocked, Emma's room painted the purple she'd requested. Daniel stood in the doorway of her new bedroom, watching her arrange stuffed animals on her bed. "What do you think?" he asked. Emma looked around, at the glow, in the dark stars he'd stuck to the ceiling, at the bookshelf he'd built himself, at the window overlooking the backyard where they'd already started planting a garden. "It's perfect," she said softly. Then, quieter, "But Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." "Can Max sleep in here, just for tonight?" Daniel smiled. "I think Max would sleep in here every night if you let him." Max, hearing his name, trotted into the room and immediately claimed the dog bed in the corner. Emma giggled and crawled into her own bed, and Daniel tucked her in the way he'd done 1,000 times in another life. "Good night, Moon." He began, reciting the familiar words without needing the book. Emma's eyes fluttered closed, a peaceful smile on her face. "Good night, stars. Good night, air. Good night, noises everywhere." Daniel kissed her forehead and turned off the light, leaving the door cracked open the way she liked. In the hallway, he paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over him. She was home. Really, truly home. Downstairs, Stevens was packing up the last of the moving supplies. "You got a good place here, Daniel. Fresh start. Clean slate." Daniel nodded, pouring them both a beer. "Still doesn't feel real sometimes." "Give it time." Stevens leaned against the counter. "You hear about Aldridge's sentencing. 30 years, no parole. Morris got 20. Brennan got 15 and lost his medical license." "Good." Stevens took a long drink. "And the other kids?" 17 reunited with biological families. 3 were too young to remember. Those cases are still in family court, figuring out what's best. One, Daniel's voice trailed off. One kid's parents didn't want him back. Said too much time had passed. Stevens swore under his breath. "That's messed up." "Yeah." Daniel stared at his beer. "The FBI's still tracking down 4 more kids from the files, international placements. It's going to take years to untangle all of it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "You ever think about going back?" Stevens asked. "To the force?" Daniel considered it. He'd resigned after the trial, unable to stomach wearing the same uniform as the men who'd stolen his daughter. But lately, he'd been thinking, About the kids still missing, about the families still searching, about the work left unfinished, maybe, he admitted. But different. Consulting, maybe. Task forces. Helping families navigate the system when it fails them. Stephen smiled. You'd be good at that. Well, see. Daniel clinked his bottle against Stevens's. For now, I'm just focused on being her dad. Later that night, after Stevens left and the house finally settled into quiet, Daniel did his routine check, doors locked, windows secure, alarm system armed. Old cop habits died hard. He paused outside Emma's door, listening to her soft breathing, then carefully pushed it open. Max lifted his head from the dog bed, tail thumping once in greeting. Emma was fast asleep, one hand dangling off the mattress, fingers resting on Max's head. Daniel's chest tightened with a love so fierce it almost hurt. He'd spent 3 years believing she was gone. 3 years drowning in guilt, in grief, in the unbearable weight of failure. 3 years wishing he could trade places with her. And now she was here, breathing, dreaming, safe. He knelt beside her bed and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. I'm sorry I wasn't there, he whispered, even though she couldn't hear him. I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. But I promise you, on everything I am, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel that afraid again. Emma stirred slightly, murmuring in her sleep, Love you, Daddy. Daniel's breath caught. Love you too, baby, more than anything in the world. Max stood slowly, limping over to Daniel and resting his head on the officer's knee. Daniel scratched behind the dog's ears, marveling once again at the impossible loyalty, the unbreakable determination that had saved them all. You're a good boy, Max, Daniel whispered. The best boy. You brought her back to me when I'd given up. You fought when I didn't know how. You saved us. Max's tail wagged gently, his dark eyes reflecting the nightlight's glow. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the 2 beings he loved most in the world, Daniel finally let himself believe that the nightmare was over. They were a family. Scarred, yes, changed, but whole. Emma slept peacefully, dreaming of purple flowers and tire swings. Max dozed contentedly, his work finally done, and Daniel sat watch, the way fathers do, guarding the fragile, precious miracle of having his daughter home. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. Inside, a house on the hill became a home. And for the first time in 3 years, Daniel Martinez allowed himself to hope for tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video. Share it with someone who believes the truth always finds its way back. Subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories like this. And comment your country below. I'd love to know where you're watching from.